You're home alone on a Friday night. No plans, nobody texting back, nothing on the calendar. And within about 10 minutes, your hand is already moving toward something. A podcast, a show you've seen twice, a scroll that doesn't even have a destination. Not because you're bored exactly, because sitting there with nothing playing and nobody around starts to feel like something you need to fix. You've probably assumed that's just how humans are wired, that being alone with your own mind is uncomfortable because, deep in your evolutionary past, being alone was dangerous. Cut off from the group meant no one watching your back, no one sharing the kill, exile that could end in death. So of course, solitude sets off an alarm. It's supposed to. That story has one real problem. It's only half right, and the half it gets wrong is the half explaining what you're actually feeling on that Friday night. It's worth sitting with how specific that discomfort actually is. It's not that you dislike silence exactly, or that you dislike your own company in some general sense. It's that the moment nothing is scheduled to happen and nobody is scheduled to arrive, your mind starts treating the quiet like a problem with a deadline. You reach for the remote before you've even registered reaching for it. That reflex is the actual thing worth explaining, not solitude itself, but the specific fast, almost involuntary discomfort with unfilled time and an unoccupied mind. Start with how uncomfortable this really is for a modern person. In 2014, a psychologist named Timothy Wilson ran an experiment that's become famous for how strange its results were. He sat people alone in a bare room for 6 to 15 minutes with nothing to do but think. No phone, no book, nothing. Most people didn't enjoy it. Then he gave them one more option, a button that delivered a mildly painful electric shock to themselves, just to see what would happen. 12 out of 18 men and 6 out of 24 women chose to shock themselves at least once rather than sit quietly with their own thoughts for those few minutes. One man shocked himself 190 times, not because the room was scary, because doing nothing, alone with an unoccupied mind, was apparently worse than pain. Wilson's team ran the experiment more than a dozen different ways, with different rooms, different instructions, different lengths of time, half expecting the effect to disappear once they controlled for something they'd missed. It didn't. People kept choosing the shock. Now hold that next to how ancient humans actually spent their days. Foraging societies weren't clustered together every waking hour. An anthropologist named Richard Lee, who spent years documenting the Chagungsan of the Kalahari, found that a huge share of daily subsistence work, gathering, tracking, walking between water sources, happened solo or in pairs spread out across long distances, often for hours at a stretch, often out of sight or earshot of anyone else. Night watches, solo hunting stalks, long walks back to camp at dusk. Physical aloneness wasn't rare in a hunter-gatherer life. It was routine. If solitude itself were the threat, you'd expect it to have worn a groove of dread into the human mind a long time before Timothy Wilson ever built his shockbox. Instead, you get people choosing pain over 10 minutes of their own company. So the fear isn't really about being physically alone. It's about something else. And a psychologist named John Cacioppo spent much of his career pinning down what that something else actually is. Cacioppo studied loneliness the way other researchers study hunger or thirst, as a evolved alarm signal, not a mood. His argument was that loneliness isn't a response to the absence of people in the room. It's a response to the absence of felt connection, the sense that you're not embedded in a group that would notice if something happened to you, wouldn't come looking, wouldn't share what it has. That signal exists because, for most of human history, a person who drifted into real social isolation, cut off from the band's food sharing, protection, and collective memory, was in genuine danger. The alarm isn't measuring how many people are physically near you right now. It's measuring whether you still belong to something. And that's the piece that changes the whole picture. A hunter-gatherer walking alone for 3 hours to check a trap line wasn't relationally cut off. He knew exactly which 25 or 30 people made up his world, knew he'd see them again at dusk, knew there was a fire that would be lit, and a place at it that was his. An anthropologist named Polly Wiesner spent years recording nightly conversations around Honzi campfires and found a clear pattern. Daytime talk was practical, logistical, task-focused, while the stories, jokes, and social repair happened almost entirely after dark, once everyone had returned. The solitude of the day and the reconnection of the night weren't intention. They were two halves of one dependable rhythm. Physical aloneness during daylight cost him nothing because it came with a guarantee baked into the structure of his entire life. The group was still there, and he was still in it. That guarantee is the thing modern solitude usually doesn't come with. You can be alone in an apartment, in a city where you don't know your neighbors, holding a phone that hasn't buzzed in hours, with no fixed fire to return to, and no fixed 25 people who'll notice if you don't show up. The same evolved alarm Cacioppo studied is still running. It just no longer has a reliable way to check whether you're actually disconnected or just quiet for an evening. So it treats the silence itself as evidence and starts pushing you toward anything that feels like contact, even a video you've already watched, even a stranger's voice in your ears. There's a second layer stacked on top of that, and it has less to do with belonging and more to do with what an unoccupied mind is used to. An anthropologist named Sarah Blaffer Hrdy has written extensively about how humans evolved as cooperative breeders. Children raised not by one exhausted parent, but by a whole rotating cast of mothers, grandmothers, older siblings, and other caregivers she calls allomothers. That same web of shared attention extended into adulthood. Nobody's sense of safety rested on one relationship or one device or one feed refreshing in their pocket. There wasn't a constant stream of curated stimulation competing for a hunter-gatherer's attention every waking hour, so an idle mind walking back from a trapline wasn't starved for input the way your mind is starved after a day of notifications, feeds, and background noise that never really stops. Researchers Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, who studied what they called attention restoration, found that unstructured time, especially outdoors, away from demands on your focus, actually settles an overstimulated mind rather than leaving it panicking for something to fill it. Ancient solitude wasn't an empty room with a shock button in it. It was closer to the only kind of rest a mind that had been working hard ever got. So the Friday night doesn't mean you're broken, and it doesn't mean ancient humans had some superior tolerance for loneliness that got bred out of you. They weren't tougher. They were embedded in a group small enough to know completely, predictable enough to trust, and unhurried enough that a quiet hour never had to compete with a feed for their attention. Your alarm system is the same one that kept a person's grandmother, siblings, and campfire in reach for nearly all of human history. It isn't going off because you're alone in a room. It's going off because it can't tell anymore whether being alone in a room means you're safe and connected or actually cut off, which is also why the fix was never really more people, faster. Filling the silence with a video or a stranger's voice doesn't answer the question the alarm is actually asking. It just drowns it out for a while, the way pressing a shock button drowned out the discomfort of Wilson's blank room without resolving anything underneath it. What actually quiets that signal, going by Cacioppo's own research, isn't the presence of noise. It's the presence of a few relationships you can trust are still there. A text you know will get answered, a person who'd notice if you went quiet, something closer to the fire a hunter-gatherer knew he was walking back to. That's a smaller, slower thing than constant contact, and it's a much better match for what the alarm was actually built to check. None of that makes the Friday night easy, but it does mean the discomfort isn't a glitch, and it isn't a sign that you've lost something ancient humans had and you don't. It's an old, accurate instinct doing its best to answer a question your modern life stopped giving it a clear way to check.